Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I have another video for you guys from Swaikage. This one is called Dissecting Orochimaru. Now we've watched other videos from Swaikage where he dissects certain characters. We watched the one for Itachi, we watched the one for Sasuke, we watched the one for Madara, and right now we're of course going to watch the one that he did for Orochimaru. So let's go ahead and watch the video.
Yo, what's going on everybody? Swaikage here, and welcome to today's video where we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite pale-skinned snake man, Orochimaru. One of many Naruto characters introduced during the Chunin exams that ended up being a mainstay in the cast up until the end of the series, though unlike many of the characters introduced during that arc, Orochimaru was a villain then and has remained a villain to this day. For the most part, anyway. What sets him apart from many...
Which is interesting because... I think if you were to ask a lot of people, do you think that Orochimaru is still a villain even in the Boruto era? It's kind of a difficult question to answer because I think everyone has their own opinion on it. Some people will say, yeah, he is still a villain. Some people will say, well, no, he's not. I'm of the position where I think I'm somewhere in between, to where I don't necessarily think he's a good guy, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think that he's a bad guy. It's weird, but he is someone that I think does need to have someone, keeping an eye on him, which I think is what Yamato is doing right now. But I also don't think that he's someone who would, go to the lengths that he did before, where he'll, sort of trick one village into attacking another just so he could get what he wants. I don't think he's there. But at the same time, like I said, I also don't think that he's just a 100% good guy.
Of Naruto's other main villains is that Orochimaru is played completely straight. He's an unapologetic bad guy, a terrible person to the core with no redeeming qualities. Now, that by itself isn't enough to make him a unique character. There are plenty of straight villains out there in the vast world of fiction, but in this series in particular, I think it's enough to make Orochimaru feel distinct. That isn't to say that Naruto doesn't have its own fair share of other straight villains, but what sets Orochimaru apart from them is his very apparent complexity. He has a pretty simple goal, and that is to become immortal and master as many jutsu as humanly possible, but what led him to that goal and the way he pursues it is what makes him so interesting. Now, the series doesn't dwell on this too much, but it is stated that Orochimaru lost both of his parents when he was young. He's an orphan. It's sort of implied that the death of his parents hit him pretty hard, as it would any child. And now, I believe that having to cope with this led him down a slippery slope, where he began to develop an extreme and unnatural bitterness towards the concept of death and human mortality overall. Now, the death of his parents on its own didn't push him over the edge. Like I said, that was just the push that sent him down the slope in the first place. Right. Orochimaru probably saw plenty of other people die during his time as a shinobi in the Hidden Leaf. He fought in the Second Shinobi World War, after all. And we do know, based on the way Nagato speaks about that war, that it wasn't the most pleasant experience for everybody involved in it. A more direct and concrete example of the effects that this war may have had on Orochimaru is the death of Tsunade's lover Don, which came shortly after the death of her little brother Nawaki, and as her squad mate, he was right there with her when she had to deal with both of these deaths. They hit Tsunade hard, and by extension I imagine they hit Orochimaru hard, as did many of the other deaths he had to witness while he was fighting as a member of the Leaf's military. Now, I know it is stated that Orochimaru had a pretty twisted and sadistic personality even as a little kid, but I'm pretty sure that his ties with his squad kept him a lot more warm and human than he was when he was first introduced in the Forest of Death. It's made apparent that Jiraiya really cared about this guy, so there was obviously some good buried deep in Orochimaru at some point. I think having people he was close to kept his insanity at bay, but eventually, whatever it was keeping him from acting like a maniac was eroded away. I think what caused him to slowly lose his humanity is a combination of what I just mentioned, the fact that he, over time, developed this very strong hatred for the concept of death, particularly due to the effects that it had on other people. But, interestingly, I also think that as Orochimaru slowly began to fear and despise death, he also grew progressively desensitized to it due to how much of it he had to see during the Second Shinobi World War. This also probably
which is interesting because one of the things that that was so interesting about the Naruto series, that that a lot of the characters, especially the older ones that you saw throughout the series, like that they, when they were young, they experienced this war, and you saw how it affected them differently. You know, you saw how it affected Nagato, you saw how it affected Jiraiya, you saw how it affected Tsunade, and you saw how it affected. Technically, it wasn't the war; it was the Nine Tails attack. But how Iruka reacted to his parents uh, when his parents died at a young age, and how he, you know, he felt alone, and how it's one of the reasons why he acted out is because he thought that was the only way to get anyone to pay attention to him. And you know, it's interesting because this is one of the things that I think a lot of people really like about Naruto, and usually what a lot of people like in storytelling is that when you have certain things happen to characters, you want to see, okay, how do they react to this? And everyone reacts to it in a different way. And Orochimaru, like, this is just how he reacted to it. You know, he saw death so many times that he basically became desensitized to it. And he also, I think he's about to mention it. I think that's one of the reasons why he's so obsessed with gaining immortality, because he wants to sort of conquer it. You know, like and he also, I think another reason why he wants immortality is because he is also someone who wants to, you know, learn all the techniques imaginable. And I think he even just outright states this at one point. Like, it's not something that's subtle. I forgot which chapter it is, but I think it happened during the Leaf invasion, where Orochimaru, you know, invaded the Leaf Village thanks to using by manipulating the Sand Village. It was during the flashback where where he was found by Hiruzen, and when he escaped, I think that was where he basically said that, you know, there's so many techniques out there, there's so many jutsus to learn, but it's not possible for someone to basically learn it all during their lifespan, because, you know, humans have a limited lifespan. And that's one of the reasons why he wants to basically gain immortality, because, you know, there's always going to be a new technique developed, and as long as there are new techniques being developed, then Orochimaru wants to learn them. And he can only really learn all of it if he has immortality. Yeah, sorry, just sort of my thoughts on that.
Wasn't helped by the fact that, like many characters have said, Orochimaru seemed to be a bit of a weirdo from the start. So obviously somebody who hates the idea of mortality and dying more than anything else is going to be driven to attempt to prevent it. And pretty much anybody who knew Orochimaru claims that he was and has always been a genius. So I feel that he was aware that he had the tools at his disposal to, at the very least, start working towards a way to prevent people from dying. Now, over time, I believe that this pretty respectable and reasonable goal of discovering a way to prevent death devolved into a new goal that only involved Orochimaru discovering a way to make himself immortal. And I believe that this happened because of all of the terrible things Orochimaru had to do in his pursuit of this. Like I mentioned earlier, he had already been desensitized to the idea of death by the Second Shinobi World War, and I think that made it significantly easier for him to justify killing other people in the pursuit of finding a permanent cure for human mortality. But this caused him to lose his humanity over time, and eventually turned him into the monster that we know him as when he is first introduced. As his sanity continued to slip away from him, I believe Orochimaru continued further down this slippery slope until he reached a point where he was willing to do absolutely anything if it meant pushing him closer to completing this immortality jutsu. Then he continued even further down this slope until becoming immortal was no longer his only ambition, and he additionally wanted to learn how to master every possible jutsu under the sun. As this began to become a core part of his ambition, Orochimaru felt that it was justified to do all of the things he had been doing in the pursuit of immortality, but for a much more selfish purpose, that being to discover and create new potential jutsu. By the time he reached this point, Orochimaru had already resorted to things like kidnapping, murder, human experimentation, and a bunch of other horrible, cruel acts, all of which had completely devolved him into a shell of the person that he used to be. By the time Hiruzen discovered him performing human experiments in his underground lab, Orochimaru had become a completely different person, a self-serving madman with a god complex and a love for chaos. Between this point and the point at which we first see him during the series, I'm pretty sure he spiraled even further into insanity, as made evident by the fact that he has 4 different hideouts, all filled to the brim with living prisoners that he performs countless experiments on. His enormous...
So I just want to comment a little bit about what he said earlier about, let me just see if I can bring it up, about, you know, the fact that he basically became someone who was willing to do whatever it takes in order to just achieve his goal. And I think that's where the parallels between him and Sasuke are, to where you know, Sasuke eventually, like, because of what happened to him, he became someone who was just willing to basically do whatever it takes in order to achieve his goal of getting revenge. And I think that Orochimaru, I again, this is just my opinion. I think that's where Orochimaru sort of realized that him and Sasuke were the same, where like he is also someone who was willing to do whatever it takes to achieve his goal. He saw that Sasuke, because he is also someone who at the time was willing to do whatever it takes to achieve his goal, is why he probably thought that he could easily manipulate him, because he understood him. Unfortunately, I think he ended up slightly underestimating him. Not that he didn't expect Sasuke to go after him. I think he even says it himself, like, yeah, I knew you were going to come for me eventually. But I think he just underestimated when. Like, I don't think he ever expected Sasuke to go after him when he was at his weakest. Which I don't think that's a knock against Sasuke. I think that's just Sasuke being smart. Like, why go after someone when they're 100% healthy when you can go after them and kill them when they're at their most vulnerable? In my opinion, that's just smart. Yeah, so I just wanted to comment on that.
He has 4 different hideouts, all filled to the brim with living prisoners that he performs countless experiments on.
Also, I just want to comment on this real quick. Sorry, I know I keep pausing, but I mean, it wouldn't be a reaction otherwise if I just let the video play out. But I just want to comment on this real quick. This is one thing that I don't like about the anime, is that they censor so much of what's in the manga. Like, here you see like all the blood coming out of Orochimaru, which makes sense considering it is piercing through him. But the anime completely censors it. Like, you don't see the blood at all. And I always hate whenever anime does that. I mean, I get it, it's, yeah, like, there's probably a lot of kids watching, and they think that, okay, maybe they can't handle it, but at the same time, they got to remember their manga, this comic, is aimed towards a younger audience. It's a shonen manga. Like, it's aimed at young boys. So if you have no problem with them seeing all of this in the manga, why do you have a problem with them seeing it in the anime? Like, that's just something that's always confused me.
Enormous ego and out-of-control god complex had also probably reached new heights, considering the fact that he assassinated the 4th Kazekage, Gaara's father Rasa, impersonated him to infiltrate the Chunin exams, and assassinated the 3rd Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, his former master, all because he thought it would be pretty funny. Then, of course, the way he speaks to and about Naruto makes it very apparent that Orochimaru doesn't really like people without talent, and considers he and prodigies like him above everybody else, or something along those lines, just based on the little speech he gives to Jiraiya during their fight in the 3-way deadlock. Now, that's not to say Orochimaru hadn't earned his ego. By early part 1, Orochimaru had mastered all sorts of jutsu, including one of the most powerful kinjutsu in the whole series, the Impure World Reincarnation technique, which he was able to use to summon Hashirama and Tobirama, the guy who created the jutsu in the first place, in order to have them fight his former master as a form of psychological warfare.
Kind of
he went through all of the trouble
ego.
To bring 2 of the most powerful shinobi who had ever lived back from the dead, just because he thought it would be funny to see Hiruzen's heart break at the thought of having to fight his 2 predecessors. The guy was a god among shinobi, who probably had over 1,000 jutsu at his disposal, much like Kakashi, but instead of copying them with the Sharingan the way Kakashi did, Orochimaru managed to learn and create all of these jutsu naturally. This brings me to my next point, which is going to involve discussing his obsession with the Sharingan and the Uchiha clan. Now, despite the fact that Orochimaru was well aware of how talented he was, he knew for a fact that no matter what jutsu he created, he would never be able to replicate the natural phenomenon that was the Sharingan. These eyes gave their owners access to some of the most
because he recognized that it's a Kekkei Genkai, and you cannot copy a Kekkei Genkai. I mean, hell, even I think it's actually in one of the Boruto novels where Sasuke even mentioned that, he can basically sort of replicate Haku's ice style, but even he says it himself, like, as powerful as this is, it's nowhere near as strong as the real deal. And that's because even someone like him, someone who's been enhanced with 6-pass chakra and has the goddamn Rinnegan, and not just any Rinnegan, I think it's kind of implied that his is a special Rinnegan, probably even more powerful than the ones we've seen up until this point, maybe even more powerful than the one that Momoshiki has. Like, even that couldn't allow him to copy a Kekkei Genkai. Like, that's just how it is. And Orochimaru, like, he realized that he wouldn't be able to replicate the Sharingan, and that's kind of why he was so obsessed with it. Like, it's like, you can imagine someone who's been able to learn all of these advanced techniques. Like he sees one and it basically outright tells him like, no, like nothing you can do will be able to like you cannot replicate this. And I can only imagine that it probably drove him insane.
Fearsome abilities in the entire shinobi world, but because they were a Kekkei Genkai, Orochimaru had no way of accessing them.
Right.
There are a whole lot of reasons why this was a problem for him. Not only was it impossible to access the Sharingan without either being born with them or having them implanted, but furthermore, all but 2 members of the Uchiha clan, to most people's knowledge anyway, had been killed off already. This meant that Orochimaru's only options for retrieving the Sharingan would be either to capture the body of Itachi Uchiha or the body of Sasuke Uchiha, both of whom were considered especially talented, even among the universally prodigal members of the Uchiha clan. While Orochimaru could have simply killed Sasuke and implanted his Sharingan himself, or stolen some of the Sharingan from Danzo's collection, I'll use Kakashi as an example once again to explain why that's a bad idea. Orochimaru wanted...
And it was the same with Nagato.
To be able to use these eyes to their fullest extent, and without an Uchiha body, he wouldn't have been able to do that. Kakashi couldn't even deactivate the Sharingan, so trying to use these eyes without an Uchiha body provides pretty severe handicaps, and I know a limitation like that for somebody like Orochimaru just wasn't going to fly. This is a guy who always wants more, and I know for a fact that he wouldn't be satisfied settling for a handicapped pair.
And that's actually very true, what he said about how Orochimaru wouldn't be able to access the Sharingan to its fullest extent. If you want another example, look at Nagato. And I know that may sound crazy considering everything we saw Nagato do with the 6 paths of pain. You guys got to remember, everything that he could do, it was still nowhere near as good as what Madara could do. Remember, Nagato needed 3 days to be able to seal all of the tailed beasts into the Gedo Mazo. 3 days, and he had to do it one by one. And well, granted, Madara needed to do that too, but if you saw what he did in the war arc, the second he got his Rinnegan back, with just one of them, he managed to seal them all instantaneously. Now, granted, you could say that maybe that was just that was a writing thing by Kishimoto. He didn't want to he didn't want to have Madara going through this long process, so he probably just came up with that on the fly to where he like, because it's his Rinnegan, he could use it better than anyone, and it was awakened within him. So yeah, again, that just goes to show you that there is, again, like what he said is absolutely true. Like, even if he did take Sasuke's eyes and implant it into him, he wouldn't have been able to use it to its fullest extent. And that just, it's like he said, that wouldn't have been enough for Orochimaru.
Pair of Sharingan. Because of this, and furthermore because of the fact that capturing Itachi Uchiha's body was completely out of the question, Orochimaru had no choice but to focus on capturing the body of Sasuke Uchiha. Because of how important the Sharingan were to him, as they would allow him to develop new jutsu much more quickly, and acquiring the Sharingan is the first step towards acquiring the Rinnegan, Orochimaru ended up becoming obsessed with capturing Sasuke's body, and as everybody knows, this is what eventually led to his downfall. I think this character arc in particular, one where Orochimaru stubbornly continues and continues and continues to attempt to acquire the Sharingan for himself, despite the fact that he already had so much, speaks volumes about who he is. He could not stomach the feeling of inferiority towards the Uchiha that his lack of Sharingan created, and like I said, eventually became so obsessed with acquiring a full power pair of Sharingan that he put his life in so much danger that he was nearly killed by Sasuke, and once again nearly killed by Itachi. Admittedly, I do think that he was pushed to a point of desperation by the effects that the Reaper Death Seal had on his body and, well, I guess multiple bodies, but the lengths he went to and the sheer amount of danger he placed himself in, also he could acquire a pair of Sharingan, thoroughly communicates just how greedy, self-centered, and ambitious Orochimaru truly is. Not to say that I hate him for any of this. All of Orochimaru's flaws, aside from the fact that he's a complete and total psychopath, are pretty human and easy to understand, and I think they make him a far more three-dimensional and interesting character than he would have been without them. Now, a lot of his evil and malice seems to have faded away over the course of the Fourth Shinobi World War and the years that followed it, but I don't really know enough about the person that Orochimaru has become to dedicate another segment to dissecting who he is now. So I think this is where I'm gonna go ahead and end the video. If you guys have any questions, of course, feel free to ask me in the comments below.
I think
and if you think I missed anything, or want me to address another aspect of his character, then by all means, ask me in the comments, and I'll do my best to reply there. Anyhow, thanks as always for watching the video all the way to the end. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and until my next video, I'll talk to you later. Swaikage out. Bye.
Well, that's actually very interesting. You know, in regards to what he said about who Orochimaru is now, it's interesting because we don't really have a lot of information on who Orochimaru is now, because, well, for one thing, in the Boruto manga, like, if I remember correctly, he hasn't made an appearance once. He does appear in the anime, and in this sort of side story. I forgot the name of it, but it's a story that focuses around Mitsuki, and it basically shows you that, you know, his like him being a clone and everything, and you find out that there's actually multiple versions of him. And it's been a while since I've seen either the anime version of this or read the story, but I think it has something to do with Orochimaru wanting to create sort of like the perfect being in Mitsuki. And I think probably the biggest example of that is that Mitsuki is someone who's supposed to be like 12 years old, and yet he already has, you know, like he already has Sage mode, which is insane. Not that it's perfected or anything, because I think it was stated, and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think it was stated that he can't use it for long. Not like Naruto, to where there's a time limit, but it's because it actually has an effect on his body. And that's one of the things that Orochimaru is trying to perfect, you know, create a body that can just probably sustain Sage mode to its fullest extent for a long period of time. Which it seems like that's something that Naruto kind of may have achieved at this point, considering what happened in the, or what was stated in the previous chapter of the Boruto manga. By the time you guys see this video, I think it's before a new chapter has been released, before the newest chapter was released. So, with that being said, guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always, remember to leave a like, share the video, subscribe if you haven't, make sure to ring the bell for notifications, and check the description box for all the links to my second channel. And I'll leave a link to, of course, this video, so you can go watch it for yourself. And make sure to leave a like. Just go support Suikage and any other creator we watch here. And also leave a link to his channel so you can head on over there and subscribe. Okay, guys, that's going to be the video, and I'll see you in my next reaction. Bye for now.